in-your-face melody, chord changes. Hello! Welcome to part 4 of my Margo devlog / postmortem series. If you don't know what Margo is, it's a game that I made. It's available for free on Steam or itch.io. I made it with my co-dev Upside Yonder. So for this one, I'm going to be talking about music and sound effects. So I made all of the music and sound effects, and my good friend Riley mixed them and mastered them, and so I'd like to share my process. So for the music, I started off with these 2 songs. They're full-on singles, kind of like pop song-ish. One is called Mitch is Moving, and the other is called Woke Up Now It's Dark. Mitch is Moving was inspired by this book that I had as a kid. It's called Mitchell is Moving. The first video in this series goes into that more, but that's what that song was inspired by, and so that kind of is what inspired me to make Margo. I use Ableton, which is a music production software, and I love it. It is my favorite of all the ones that I've tried. I went from GarageBand to Apple Logic to Reaper and then now to Ableton. So what you can do in Ableton is they give you 2 views, and so there's session view and timeline view, and so timeline view is a linear timeline of your song, and then session view is, in my opinion, more like a palette, and so you can kind of drag things and drop things there, and then drag them or record them into your timeline. I never really used session view for a long time, but then when I started doing this, I was like, okay, I have these 2 songs. A lot of the recording is just MIDI and software instruments, and so I could take chunks of the MIDI and put it into session view and have this big project where I could just drag and drop things and change instruments and make an entire soundtrack just out of these 2 songs. And so I would just shorten stuff into little loops. I would have a section of drum loops, a section for guitar loops, a section for software instruments. In a way, I kind of already had my palette. It was just a matter of focusing on the compositional aspects of a game soundtrack, which I had never done before. And so I had to learn about that, and so it was really helpful to already have all of the music kind of written out. Something that I learned when making a soundtrack for a game was how minimal I kind of had to be, especially in the beginning. At first I started out kind of with more full-blown songs, and it just didn't really fit the vibe because I kind of wanted it to feel like it was going somewhere. And so, for example, the bedroom level was pretty minimal. And then into the living room, because there was more stuff that you could do, it kind of got a bit more complicated. Then the next level, which is the hall level, is kind of this liminal kind of break from that. And then leading into the kitchen, which is even more complicated than the living room. It was really fun to play with that, saying okay, what's the vibe of this level, and then how do I enforce that with the music. So one thing that I definitely had to add was a lot of background noise. I was just this needs something. All I'm hearing is just kind of an empty kind of song. And so for me, the key was to sample a lot of different room noise, and so I went around my house with my phone and I sampled our fridge and the furnace and our clock, stuff like that, as well as doing some synthetic noise, synthetic drones. I felt combining the noise and droney stuff with music really helped to round it out a bit. It's kind of you're putting this energy into it or something. Because in reality, when we're in a house, it's not just dead silent. There's all these house noises that we don't even think about. That's really what I learned, is that you just need to make a vibe. And there are times when you want to draw a little bit of attention to the music, but for the most part I wanted it to just kind of not be in your face melody, chord changes. I learned a lot from a channel called 8-Bit Music Theory, which is a pretty big channel, so shout out. It can be kind of overwhelming because there can be so many different variations of what you can do. Trying to say okay, what is the vibe of this scene? How does it relate to the rest of the game? How does it relate like emotionally? All of those questions really helped me narrow down, okay, what am I trying to do? I'm the type of person who can just like sit there and like fiddle with things and just like forever and then be like, oh, that's not what I want. Having to like take a second and be like, okay, what am I trying to do? And also like that really helps just in terms of like confirmation. Like I feel like in a lot of creative stuff there can be like this feeling where what is right, like what feels right, what sounds right. And so when I kind of came up with a way to like confirm my creative decisions based on like what I was trying to do in the scene, that was like really helpful in just making the process feel better. So for the sound effects, this was like probably one of the most fun parts about making Margo. I have been wanting to learn audio synthesis. I just hadn't found like the right soft synth or plugin because the one that I really liked is called Dext, and it's an FM synthesis plugin, and there's like lots of patches for it online, and so I used a lot of that. I used a lot of Dext for the music and not the sound effects. I tried to learn Dext, but the interface for me is just like a bit too overwhelming. There's so many knobs. But anyway, recently I upgraded to Ableton Live Suite, and so it has a plugin called Operator. It's basically just like this cute little plugin. The Operator plugin takes like the idea of like synthesis that you would, you know, use like an analog thing. It's basically the same thing, but a little plugin that does what that box would do. I found it really easy to just like make weird sounds with it. And so making sound effects was like such a cool way to learn more about synthesis. With sound effects, because it's kind of like you're going for a specific sound and you have a goal in mind, and it's just a short little thing, it makes it really satisfying to try and achieve that with just like twisting knobs. And so another workflow that I found really helpful was using a drum rack in Ableton, which is essentially just like a plugin with like all these different pads that you can basically just drop anything into. So you can have a sample or you can have like an actual instrument in that pad, and so I would just load up a drum rack just filled with instances of Operator. If I found a sound that I liked but wasn't necessarily the sound that I was trying to make at that time, I would just drag it into like this big spam drum rack that I made, and as they accumulated, the next time I went to find a sound, I would just like flip through and listen to all of the sounds that I had made and, you know, try to find something that was similar, and then take that and then start to tweak it to get what I wanted for that sound effect. One thing that I struggled with for a while was trying to get water sounds. So it's not like a pluck or a crunch, it's like this like more complicated sound, I guess, and also like a very natural sound. And so I reached out to my friend Riley. He told me that if you set the first operator to be a bit higher and then the second operator that's affecting that one to be a bit lower, it kind of creates like this kind of like splashy effect. There were some sounds that I either recorded, like I just sampled with my phone, like I think like the skateboard, I just sampled like a real skateboard sliding along the floor. And then for the voices, like I sampled like myself for Margo, my friend Angie did the voice for Mitch. Shout out Angie. And she also helped me with Mitch's character design. I sampled my aunt's dog, my neighbor's cat, my mom. I sampled my mom for the ghost lady. And I sampled a horse, my mom's friend's horse named Fred, for Gilles the giraffe, and a crow for the raven. I took those and then I added like filters to make it sound like more like lo-fi. The last thing I'm going to talk about is exporting. So when you have like tons and tons of sound effects and you're trying to export them one by one, it gets very tedious. I heard about this program called, I think it's just called like Clip Exporter. It's a Max for Live plugin for Ableton, and then there's also Clip Renamer. Those plugins make it super easy to export all of the samples and also rename them. I think I'm gonna do one more of this series. I think it's just gonna be like a summary of what I'm gonna do differently for the next game, which is gonna be about Mitch. We just started like the first part of production. I've been streaming it regularly on Twitch, twitch.tv/Vigrets. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe.